Hello everyone. In this video we're going to talk about loops in C#. We're going to talk about the three different types of loops there are in C#, the syntax, and then we'll put an example of one of these loops in our sample program. So let's go ahead and get started. What are loops? Loops are used to implement repetitive logic in computer programs. Loops in C# are used to repeat a block of code until a condition is met. They're very useful to process many routine programming tasks. For example, you might use a loop to loop over every student in a class, process each student in a group. Or you might process a paycheck for every employee at a particular location. There are three different types of loops in C#, so let's look at each one of those and the syntax for those. The first type of loop we'll look at in C# is the for loop. The example code is listed on this page. It starts with the for, and you'll notice that there's an integer of I declared, and it loops from I equal 1 to I less than or equal to 10, which is the terminating condition, and then the last part of the loop says I++, which means it will take 1 and add it to I each time the loop is calculated. So this write line statement will be executed 10 times. So a for loop is a loop that will take an integer value and we'll look at some terminating condition and then some incremental value. So we'll go through a determined number of times to process things. So again, the example might be, it might be a count of some type of thing in a group, and then you're processing each element in a group. So that's a classic use for a for loop. The next type of loop we'll look at in C# is the while loop. The example written on this page, you can see after the comment the while and the condition in the parentheses. The condition needs to be true, and then the statements, while that condition is true, the statements that are in the brackets will be repeated until that condition is false. A classic use for this might be to use looking for in a menu in a program, and if the user selects a particular key, then you can set the condition to be false, and then the loop will exit. And maybe the program will exit at that time as well. We'll actually be including an example of this in our sample program in the example. So that's really all there is to the while loop. It's a very simple syntax, but it's used extensively in C# programs. The last type of loop we'll look at in C# is the do loop. The do loop is almost exactly the same as the while loop, except the while condition is at the end of the loop instead of at the beginning of the loop. What this will change is that the loop is guaranteed to execute at least one time because the condition is not evaluated until the bottom of the loop. So when you use this statement, if there's some particular programming condition that you need to do at least once, but possibly more times, you would use a do while loop and have the while condition at the end of the loop. Again, it's very similar to the while loop, just moving the condition to the end of the loop instead of the beginning of the loop. So now it's time to look at an example. We'll clarify how a loop can be used in a program, and we'll add a loop to our sample program in our main method to demonstrate how it's used. So let's go ahead and look at the code on the next page. The code listing below is what we're going to be adding to our main method. First, we're going to declare a Boolean variable called done that we're going to initialize to false. Next, we're going to add a while loop, and we'll continue to loop while done is equal to false. If you notice the brackets for 3 and 4, this is the beginning and end brackets that will compose everything inside the loop. It's indented to make it easier to read. Next, we're going to have the same code inside our loop, but we're adding an if statement to check to say if my name is exit, the thing that we've added in our if statement, is then we're going to set the done condition to be true. That will exit our loop and will also exit our program. So we'll continue to ask for your name until you type the exit condition, and then that will exit the program. This is a classic use of a while loop. So let's go ahead and jump into Visual Studio and let's write some code and see how this is done. Alright, now I'm on my development machine, and the first thing I'm going to do, like we've done in the last few exercises, I'm going to go ahead and make a backup copy of my previous project. which was chapter 8, and now I'm going to move it over and rename that into chapter 9. So we'll be doing this before each exercise, so that way if you have some problems you can go back to a previous version, and we'll just be building more code within each lesson. So I'll go ahead and open up the solution and in Visual Studio. So it takes just a few seconds here for Visual Studio to load this up. And then once the solution is loaded up, I'll go ahead and select the C# program out of that and load up the source code from the last lesson. So it'll take just a minute, and the security warning is always when you copy a program, it'll ask if this is a trustworthy source, which it is since it's our own computer. So now I'm going to go ahead and make the code modifications. So the first thing we're going to add, if you remember back from the slide, we'll add in our Boolean variable. So I'm going to add in this Boolean variable called done, and I'm going to initialize it to false. So I'll go ahead and do that, and now I'm going to go ahead and try to add in our loop and see if I can do it without making any typos here. So right before our method call, we'll add the beginning of our while loop. So you can see Visual Studio is trying to help us with the code, so I've added the basic while loop, and now I'm going to add the bracket. Notice how Visual Studio puts the end bracket in for me, but I want to move the end bracket down to just beneath the last executable line in our main method, and I add that. And notice how Visual Studio indents the code for us so that we know all of this code above here is contained in our loop. The indenting just makes it easier to read. It really doesn't affect the code, but you can see how that's indented. And now I'm going to go ahead and set our condition to false, and I'm going to check to make sure that that's the condition is for the exit, so I'll add that in our if condition. And we're no longer going to check the length, we're going to just check the name itself. So I'm taking off the length piece, and now I'll go ahead and set our condition to be true. So done will be true, and so then the loop should exit. So let's go ahead and build this, and if I look at the output window, we'll see if the build was successful, and it was. So let's go ahead and run this, and I'll run it without the debugger. We'll look at the debugger a little bit later in this class. So I'll enter in my name once, I'll enter it a second time, and now I'll enter in exit, and the program does exit. Oh, it looks like I forgot to add something here. I didn't change the right line statement to be the correct syntax. So let's go ahead and change that, and we'll say thank you and goodbye. Let's add that in there. And we'll go ahead and fix up this right line statement. Oh, it looks like I have an extra S in there, so I'll take that out. Let's go ahead and run it one more time just to make sure everything's working. So testing is a big part of programming, so we'll run this a few times here. I'll enter my name, now I'll enter in exit, and voila. So it looks like our program is working. So that is the basic use of a while loop, and so we've added to our sample program. So that's really the demonstration on how we added a loop to our sample programs. Again, just to summarize, loops are used for repetitive program logic. They're very commonly used in all programming languages, and in C# there are three basic syntax structures for the loop. We'll be using these in other areas of our sample program as we expand them. So it's a very common program structure, and we'll see that used throughout the rest of this class. I've included a link here that gives you the official Microsoft documentation on loops for C#, and that's really it for this lesson. We'll move on to the next area of the C# language in the next lesson. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Goodbye.